Chapter 28. The Siege. Ares stood just beyond Cairo's walls, at the officers' barracks, a sprawling military camp that had become the nerve centre for the city's siege. The night air around him was disconcertingly still, only a few hundred metres away from what had once been a bustling metropolis. In calmer times, the main gates would be alive with commerce, lamplit gatherings, and countless intertwining stories. Now, only the distant call of cicadas and the silent vigil of stars bore witness to the tense standoff below. Behind Ares, voices murmured within canvas tents and hastily built huts lit by one lanterns. Brotherhood members and Egyptian officers conferred in subdued urgency. His status as a Brotherhood member had been critical over the past week, helping organise the blockade and shape their strategy. As he considered Cairo's options, he reached into his pouch, feeling a momentary burst of discomfort when he didn't feel the artifact. Remembering it was stored securely on Suscepant, guarded by Captain Theron, he attuned himself to the low conversation, edged with desperation, occurring around him. "We've got infantry lines around the entire perimeter," someone reported, tension lacing every word. "Naval defences are anchored 200 metres offshore." Another voice responded, "Good. We can use the Nile to bring in supplies from the south. Any word from Atlantis or Dogon?" A short silence fell. Then the first speaker continued. "Heirs from Atlantis are sending 1,000 soldiers, plus siege equipment. They'll be here before daybreak. The Dogon arrived at sundown and have helped reinforce our positions." A muted snort followed. "Glad to see Atlanteans cooperating, though I hear one was initially reluctant." Any mention of Atlantis tugged at Ares. Recent events had left him uneasy about alliances and leadership. During the 6 days of siege, he'd stolen away to visit his childhood home, only to learn from his mother, Yrsa, that his father, Polaris, had gone into Cairo the very morning the Neanderthals attacked. The thought gnawed at Ares relentlessly. He didn't know if his father was alive, dead, or held captive. Now he stood beneath the quiet stars, torn between duty and dread, knowing that by tomorrow, fresh challenges would arise, and he'd meet them. He clung to any spark of hope. From atop the Temple of Ra in the city's centre, Vargan surveyed Cairo's outer defences. The pyramids' pale silhouettes gleamed in the starlight, and the open plains beyond the walls were layered with infantry, ramparts, and trenches. Torches revealed each hasty fortification and defensive line, visible proof that humanity recognised the Neanderthals' lethal potential. Across the horizon on the seaward side, the glow of distant lanterns and sails marked a naval cordon, Egyptian warships forming a ring of iron and light around the city's coastal flank. Suddenly the scream of a captive shattered the nighttime hush below. It was an all too familiar sound now, one that weighed even on the most callous hearts who heard it. Vargan knew the source, hidden in the darkness of the courtyard. Bruchar, his saber-toothed tiger, took its nightly tribute. Each dawn brought renewed terror to the battered city. Each dusk heralded another life, devoured at Vargan's command. Pharaoh Seti Khamun sat alone in a forgotten chamber, deep within his own palace, stripped of regal comforts and consumed by sleepless nights. The stale odour of long-burned incense clung to the air, and a heavy wooden door stood locked at all hours. He had spent an unrelenting week as a captive, subjected daily to the Neanderthals' unyielding questions. Fine robes hung limply on his frame, while tension scored lines across his face. A soft creak of hinges signalled company. Seti Khamun straightened reflexively as Vargan entered, carrying a single lantern that flickered across the walls. The pharaoh offered no formalities. Captivity had no room for them. "I have news," Vargan said. His voice was calm yet laden with authority. "We've altered the pyramid's frequency. No longer do they play your pleasant tune. Now they cast a wave of dissonance over the entire region." Anger flashed in Seti Khamun's eyes. Twisting the pyramid's energy in such a way was considered heresy. My people rely on that 432 Hz harmony for peace. Now you've replaced it with fear. Do you realize you're undermining everything we've built to help them face life's end without dread? Vargan's stare was impenetrable. We've known only dread and isolation. In the ice, my people never felt your so-called harmony. Hardship defined us. A taut silence settled. Seti Khamun wrestled with the bitter truth that his city was under siege by those who believed this was their only chance. Then why force chaos on a city at peace? Because a cataclysm approaches, an asteroid that our astrologers predict will strike the ice within a year, Vargan answered. We won't wait for extinction. We must migrate south, or none of us survive. Cairo, your land, your people, they're an obstacle, or at best, a resource. It's not cruelty, but necessity. Seti Khamun's spirit sank at the thought of such a cosmic disaster. Perhaps both sides were trapped in a terrifying inevitability. There could have been another way, Vargan sighed. Not for us. We need raw impetus, not the lull of tranquility. Fear and dissonance drive my people to action. So yes, we shifted the pyramid's tune for our advantage. Their conversation ended not in agreement, but in mutual sad acceptance. Doom pressed closer, forged by cosmic threat and a clash of polar philosophies. Vargan departed, leaving Seti Khamun alone with his troubled thoughts and the discordant thrumming that had replaced Cairo's beloved resonance. Within Cairo's mess hall, once the domain of public debate and gentle scholarship, now lay the city's captive population, herded into a sprawling chamber. The air tasted of fear. Every day, more captives vanished, sometimes killed to prove the invaders' dominance, sometimes for reasons no one understood. Neanderthal guards ringed the space, eyes cold and watchful. Polaris, Ari's father, was among them. Each day had worn his spirit thinner, but the memory of Ursa's laughter and the simple joys they once shared anchored him. Her voice sustained him, reminding him of a life not ruled by violence. A young woman hunched at his side. She stifled her tears while casting frantic glances at the guards. "My husband Canis," she whispered. Her voice trembled. "We were separated that first day. I haven't seen him since. I'm so afraid he's gone." Polaris offered quiet empathy. "I understand. My wife, Ursa, is safe somewhere beyond these walls. I pray. Every moment, I hope she believes the same of me." She blinked in faint surprise at his calm demeanour. "How do you stay steady when every hour someone could be taken from us?" His face reflected compassion. "I hold on to memories of home. I remember her voice, how she would hum while tending the garden. This is what keeps me from giving in to despair." In the depths of captivity, brief sparks of kindness existed as fragile defiance. Outside of the city, siege lines pressed in from all sides. Yet these small mercies of humanity reminded them all that hope, however tenuous, could still be found, like a light flickering against the darkness that threatened to consume them. The woman's eyes brimmed with tears, but a trace of calm settled into her posture, as though finding someone who understood was a relief in itself. "He was a musician," she whispered, dabbing at her cheeks. "He'd play the reed flute at dusk. Sometimes, if I close my eyes, I can still hear it." Polaris offered a faint, encouraging nod. "My wife Ursa loves music too. She lives for sound and frequency. She always called them life's tapestry. Maybe your Canis and my Ursa would have become good friends, had the world allowed it." They both drifted into a silence that held for a moment, a gentle memory shared between them amid the fear. Far off, the wails of prisoners and the barked commands of guards haunted the chamber. Yet for one fragile instant, that terror gave ground to the thought of distant loved ones and a simpler life. Hold on to whatever you can of him. It might not change our reality right now, but it'll keep you strong inside. And who knows, perhaps that inner strength will help us survive long enough to see another chance, Polaris said gently. She managed a shaky smile. "Thank you. At least I'm not alone in holding on to something worth fighting for." Polaris responded with a quiet smile of his own. Around them, the other captives shifted restlessly in the gloom, bracing for whatever brutality the morning may bring. And in that bleakness, their small exchange was like a candle's glow in a darkened hall, thin yet undeniably present, a reminder that kindness and hope could endure even in the deepest shadow. Late into the same night, a heavy quiet enveloped the siege lines beyond Cairo. Torches flickered uneasily, forming wavering shadows that played across the worried faces of soldiers and officers who'd been awake since dusk. Ares stood among them, burdened by dread, when a subtle tremor pulsed through the still air. It began as a faint hum, just at the edge of hearing, but quickly swelled, a dissonant murmur forcing itself into every breath. All around, garrisons of troops and Brotherhood members winced or rubbed their temples. The pyramid's once harmonious frequency, which had for years reassured and united them, now sang a low, malevolent chord. Each soldier felt his spirit waver, and the officers seemed to lose some of their determination. Ares pressed his teeth together, willing himself to stay clear-headed, ignoring the bleakness that tugged at his mind like a lead weight. He stepped toward a knot of Egyptian officers, gathered by a makeshift command tent. "How are our defences?" he asked, his voice steeling itself against the oppressive atmosphere. "If the Neanderthals pull a wide flank around us, do we have anything behind our lines to stop them?" Exchanging troubled glances, the officers hesitated. Finally one answered, their brow furrowed. "We've no secondary fortifications in the rear. Everything is concentrated on the front and around the city's main approaches. We never planned to fight an enemy striking from multiple directions." The admission brought a surge of frustration that meshed with the pyramid's grim hum, as if the negativity itself were influencing their reason. Their blockade now seemed fragile, pinned between hostile city walls and the potential for encirclement. Over the low moan of wind, new noises arose, drums, the rhythmic clatter of armour and hooves. Through the gloom, a line of warriors advanced in disciplined ranks, torches glinting off chariot wheels and siege engines, Atlanteans. As they neared, Ares recognised their silhouettes. "Set a second line behind our siege lines," he murmured to a nearby officer, then moved off. At the forefront of the Atlantean column was a Theros, clad in armour and riding tall. With a raised hand, the Atlantean signalled to slow. Dismounting, he approached Ares. "Ares," a Theros called, his voice cutting through the gloom. "I've come as promised, though not in the strength we hoped." He paused, letting out a breath. "My brother, Kalion, refused to send more of our forces. I've arrived with 1,200 of Atlantis' best. I represent Atlantis in this battle." Despite the way of exhaustion, Ares felt a flicker of relief. Reinforcements, any reinforcements, proved a blessing. The Atlantean troops spread out. Their measured discipline injected a quiet resolve into the demoralized Egyptian lines. The pyramid's discord still pressed on them all. Together, Egyptians, Atlanteans, and Ares stood a little steadier under its weight. At dawn, a pale, haunted light crept over the encampment. Ares awoke to a cacophony of shouting, the clang of metal, the rasping grind of wood on wood. He rubbed sleep from his eyes. Each motion felt like it fought against the thick haze of the pyramid's dissonant hum. The atmosphere was oppressive, a drag on every soldier's spirit. He dressed with brisk efficiency, stepping outside to find the camp in a hive of purposeful chaos. Soldiers scrambled to hammer stakes, pile sandbags, and mount sharpened barriers behind their central lines. Atlantean engineers guided Egyptian labourers, building a makeshift ring of outposts and barricades that would stand as a final fallback if the main siege line broke. Everyone's face showed fatigue. The gloom of the negative frequency stifled all but the fiercest determination. Yet they pressed on. Atheros' Atlantean forces meshed with the Egyptian regiments, forging an alliance of caution and quiet anger over the city's fall. The Egyptians laboured in dogged silence, focusing their grief and fury into strengthening their hold on the land outside the gates. Ares spotted a Theros moving between squads, offering murmured directions and encouragement. Nearby, an Egyptian captain huddled over a map with an Atlantean scout, pointing at planned spots for archers and ballistae. Many shoulders drooped under the gloom, yet no one faltered. They had no choice but to stand firm. Dragging in a steadying breath, Ares leaned against the wooden rail that marked their impromptu command post. Over the ramparts, Cairo's walls loomed, silent and ominous, under wisps of drifting smoke. The pyramid's pale sheen flickered in the corner of his vision, though they no longer radiated calm. He reminded himself why he was here, pushing away the gloom that gnawed at his heart. If there was a chance to save his father, to free the city's hostages, it lay in unity. Some movement at his shoulder turned him. A Theros approached, the lines of exhaustion on his face framed by glints of his unwavering spirit. "I didn't think we'd meet again so soon," a Theros said, his voice cutting through the ambient clatter. Ares mustered a faint smile. "I'm grateful you came at all. The men need to see solidarity." He fell silent, his gaze drifting to Cairo's battered skyline. Smoky daylight glimmered on stone walls stained by conflict. "My father is inside," Ares said at length, his voice weighted by a week of gnawing fear. "I don't know if he's alive or—" He trailed off. Sympathy touched Atheros' features. "I wish you'd found better news by now," he murmured. "Your mother must be frantic." Ares nodded, swallowing the knot in his throat. "She's strong, but no one should bear this kind of uncertainty." Atheros set a hand on Ares' shoulder. "Your parents, I hope fate deals them kindness," he said softly, before clearing his throat. "What's our next step? Any plan to retake the city?" Ares breathed deeply. "We think no more than 600 Neanderthals hold it. We've 10 times their number if we dared an assault. If we rush in, hostages die. That's the greatest risk." Looking toward the dissonant gleam of the Great Pyramid, Atheros' brow tightened. "We need the frequency restored. My men weaken further each day. A direct strike on the pyramid would let us undo their sabotage, but it would alert those inside." Ares folded his arms. "They've stayed silent for a week. Either they wait for reinforcements, or are mustering a plan. We must handle both, reclaim the pyramid and keep them off balance. Better to force them to react." Atheros nodded grimly. "Agreed, the Neanderthals have to be truly desperate to stake everything on an invasion. We'll match that desperation with our own determination." They stood shoulder to shoulder, gazing out at the city's ravaged walls and the violent hush beyond. Smoke lingered, twisting in the early light. In the uneasy morning, the negative hum continued, each heartbeat carrying anxious thoughts of the conflict looming ahead. Yet they held fast, forging a shield of cooperation against the unknown. The morning sun crept higher, revealing a tense tableau of makeshift fortifications and anxious soldiers, while Cairo, beyond the walls, remained silent. Ares and Atheros stood, studying the city, bracing themselves for what this day might bring. The day itself stretched into an uneasy stalemate beneath Egypt's glaring sun, a kind of suspended animation. Thousands of troops stood guard around the city, watchful but unmoving, the hostages hidden behind tall ramparts and the Neanderthal occupiers offering neither terms nor demands. As night fell for the 7th time since the siege began, the negative frequency from the tampered pyramid continued to saturate the air, reminding all of what was lost. The siege lines glimmered with the weak glow of campfires. Most soldiers kept close to their tents, resting warily or pacing the ramparts. Ares hovered near the command tent. His mind was restless. He suspected something would happen soon. No stalemate lasted forever. His suspicions proved true just after midnight. A muffled alarm went up from the eastern perimeter, distant at first but swiftly escalating into shouts of urgency. The watchmen along the back defences spun around, scanning the moonlit fields behind them. Then a flurry of horns sounded, their blare cutting through the silence. Torches flared, revealing soldiers scrambling to snatch up weapons. A disbelieving hum spread through the camp. They had presumed all Neanderthals were locked inside Cairo. They had been wrong. Under cover of night, 2 more Neanderthal ships had made landfall, hidden west of the blockade. Now, roughly 600 fresh Neanderthal warriors crashed into the unprepared rear lines, tall, savage silhouettes lit by moonlight, their heavy footfalls and fierce grins announcing their lust for battle. "Stand to arms," Ares cried, seizing his sword as officers barked orders to reposition their troops. Atheros darted from the command tent, blade in his hand and shock in his eyes. The carefully arranged siege lines, hastily adjusted only yesterday, would face their first true test tonight. Chaos erupted as the Neanderthals lunged forward, howling war cries echoing across the plain. Flames shot through the dark in an eruption of hissing arrows. Their fiery tips sank into tents, into earth, and into the occasional soldier who was too slow to evade. The dull thud of each impact morphed into the crackle of igniting cloth and brush. The Neanderthals pressed their advantage. They smashed into the perimeter of spike walls, wooden stakes, and mounds of sandbags. The defenders were rattled, however they didn't fold. They dug in with braced spears and locked shields, grimly determined to hold. Yet not every line remained unscathed. The Neanderthals, in places, hacked and tore through weaker barricades. Their axes splintered stakes, their boots crushed embers and rubble underfoot. Soon a portion of the siege line broke. 300 or so of the invaders forced a wedge into the camps, setting fire to stockpiles and toppling supply wagons. The scent of burning wood and spilled blood thickened, while roars of battle surged on every side. The fight became a patchwork of skirmishes, tents aflame, clusters of soldiers and Neanderthals clashing in hand-to-hand combat amid the swirling smoke. Egyptian archers tried to gain high ground, only to be chased down by soot-covered warriors. All along the line, steel rang against iron, and the night choked with shouts and the keening shriek of wind-blown embers. Brotherhood members spread across the battlefield and fought with valiant precision while they swiftly attempted to dispatch their foes. Many had honed their martial skills far longer than both the soldiers and the Neanderthal warriors, giving them a clear edge. Yet despite their near-flawless combat abilities, some still fell in the fray, a sobering reminder that they remained, in the end, only human. Ares and Atheros plunged into the thickest fighting, leading a desperate countercharge. The Atlantean prince slashed down a bellowing warrior who lunged at him, while Ares sidestepped a spear thrust and answered with a lethal slash of his own. The swirling flames illuminated them in stark relief. Sweat stained their brows, their eyes rimmed with grit and determination. It stung Ares' heart that he must kill again, but in the face of savage necessity, he pressed on without hesitation. All around, friend and foe blurred beneath flickering torches. One moment, an Egyptian officer fought valiantly. An instant later, that officer lay unmoving. Neanderthals too met brutal ends when the humans rallied and formed disciplined pockets, dividing and conquering. Shoulder to shoulder, Ares and Atheros drove forward, their combined attacks scattering any who dared oppose them. Despite exhaustion gnawing at their strength, the defenders refused to break. Slowly, the tide turned. Where the Neanderthals saw exhaustion, the defenders found unity. Their cunning lines of spears inflicted a punishing toll. The intruders' momentum stalled as they realized they were outmatched by organized ranks. Their roars gained a desperate edge, their formations splintered. With each yard retaken, the human defenders closed in, isolating smaller knots of Neanderthals and wiping them out in fierce bursts of violence. Fires still raged, and the stench of blood and ash grew dense. Eventually, the last of the invaders were forced down, leaving the defenders battered yet victorious. Bodies lay in piles, smoke and drifting embers tinted the night sky deep orange. Atheros, panting heavily, clapped Ares on the shoulder. "That behind-lines fortification saved us," he managed between breaths. Your foresight spared us a disaster. Had we been unprotected, they'd have torn us apart. Across the camp, medics emerged to tend the wounded. Soldiers, shaky with relief, began stamping out fires and dousing embers with water from sloshing buckets. The memory of the savage fight lingered in the crisp air, a victory, but also a sobering realization of how close they'd come to annihilation. Above the scorched fields beyond Cairo's walls, Vargan peered from the palace balcony, the moonlight exposing the harsh lines of rage carving his face. Smoke and flames illuminated the perimeter in flickers of orange, and in that inferno-lit gloom, he'd watched his reinforcements fail. Their numbers, 2 ships' worth of warriors, had perished in the night's fierce struggle. Not one had escaped. Far below, the final cries of combat had died away, replaced by subdued murmurs as the humans tallied their own losses and tended to survivors. Vargan clenched the balcony rail, fury coursing through him. This was not how he'd planned it. Those warriors should have broken the blockade from behind. Instead, their corpses littered the battlefield. The Egyptians, Atlanteans, and that meddling Brotherhood fighter had proved more cunning than expected. Within the human encampment, a subdued silence replaced the once pitched battle. Soldiers muttered quietly as they reorganized. Ares and Atheros paused at a crude table, just barrels stacked with planks, to review charts scrawled in the heat of the moment. Sweat and ash streaked both men's faces. Their breathing still laboured from the fight. "You said it, there must be more," Atheros said, his voice raspy. "We need to anticipate more attacks, even if the city is blockaded. They could try more landings." "Agreed," Ares responded, glancing over the scrawls that denoted both the city and the outlying defences. "How many more can they possibly spare? This may have been their best opportunity, disrupting the blockade from within and from outside, forcing our lines to collapse." A messenger hurried over. They saluted with brisk efficiency. "Scouts returning, sirs." He gestured to a pair of dusty, breathless scouts emerging from the darkness. Ares motioned them forward. One caught his breath. "We discovered 2 Egyptian transport ships near the city's southwestern approach. Supplies offloaded, maybe some men, but not many." Atheros drummed his fingers on the table. Tension was evident. "So they have minor reinforcements inside the walls, only a few hundred by the looks of it. That means that their main force remains in the north or beyond. The city's defenders are not thousands strong." "That's still more than enough to keep us at a stalemate," Ares cautioned. "It's good news that they can't bring a full army through that route." Dismissing the scouts with thanks, Ares turned to Atheros and inhaled slowly. "We've survived the night, but I doubt it's the last time they'll test us. Next time, we must be ready." Atheros nodded, his gaze briefly drifting to the glow around the pyramid's silhouette. The negative frequency still pulsed, a disquieting throb in the background that had torn down humanity's spirit over the past week. "Indeed, we hold on, and we learn. Then we strike back. And maybe we restore that damned pyramid while we're at it." Together, they faced the hush of the early dawn, the fresh scars of battle etched on the landscape. Firelight danced in the distance, reflecting off soot-streaked faces and the silent forms of fallen soldiers. Above all loomed the city walls, and the knowledge that the final contest was yet to begin. As dawn spread thin bands of pink and gold across the sky, the embers of the night's battle still smouldered in the fields before Cairo's walls. Though battered, the siege lines held firm in the calm after a storm of blood and fire. Ares allowed himself a careful breath of the cool morning air, relief twined with persistent tension. They had repelled the Neanderthal assault twice now, first from within and then from behind, and each time the defenders had risen to the challenge. Yet Ares knew complacency had no place here. He gazed over the makeshift barricades, where weary soldiers snatched what rest they could. Beyond those immense stone walls lay thousands of captive lives, perhaps including his father, Polaris. That uncertainty haunted him, a constant ache in his chest. Every hour the city remained in Neanderthal hands was an hour for the invaders to deepen the suffering of their prisoners and to maintain a dreadful stalemate. Ares resolved time was not their ally. The night's darkness had yielded to daylight, and with it came the imperative to act. Standing among scorched debris and upturned soil, he braced himself for the next step. The men and women behind him, Egyptians, Atlanteans, Brotherhood, were raw-nerved and uneasy under the pyramid's dark tune. They had endured too long. Straining at the leash, the moment had come to break the deadlock. Turning on his heel, Ares moved toward the officers' quarters, where Atheros and the rest awaited a plan. He would give it to them. He could feel their impatience like a simmering fire in their veins, mirroring his own. With the new day, their task would not be simple defense. It would be the start of a final push into Cairo, to save its people, confront the Neanderthals, and silence the noxious frequency pouring from the ancient pyramid. The path ahead promised bitter conflict and sacrifice. Anything less meant ceding the city, and all trapped within it to an unthinkable fate.